So linguistic creativity, as Joe said, is at the heart of linguistics. Back in 1965, Noam Chomsky already said, within traditional linguistic theory, furthermore, it was clearly understood that one of the qualities that all languages have in common is their creative aspect. Thus, an essential property of language is that it provides the means for expressing indefinitely many thoughts and for reacting appropriately in an indefinite range of new situations. It is therefore not surprising that Goldberg in a 2006 book picked up on this and said that constructional approaches share with mainstream generative grammar the goal of accounting for the creative potential of language. That is, it is clear that language is not a set of sentences that can be fixed and advanced. Allowing constructions to combine freely as long as there are no conflicts allows for the infinitely creative potential of language. Underlying of both of these definitions, however, I would argue, is the idea that very often in linguistics, we treat creativity as productivity. So if something novel comes up and it's based on an existing rule, on an existing schema, however you want to frame it, then we already call this creative. From a psychological perspective, and I think it's fair to say that this is the field that has done most research on creativity, creativity is of course defined slightly differently. The standard definition is by Simonton, who says creativity is originality times appropriateness. If you think about it like this, singing happy birthday on someone's birthday is, well, highly appropriate, but not very creative or original because lots of people have done it. At the same time, if you want to write a novel, it would be really original if you had a bit of bird seed and poured it over a keyboard and had birds picking away at the keyboard and they would type words in quotation marks. But of course, it wouldn't be appropriate because no one could read it, no one would understand it. So there you can already see that for something to be creative, it must not only be novel to a certain degree, but it must be deemed appropriate by a reference group. When we talk about creativity, very often we also talk about creativity with a capital C. So this high art, high class creativity, the invention of the wheel, the iPhone, classical music composers being really creative, Shakespeare and so on. So high quality and aesthetic quality is sometimes also added to this definition. But I would on this talk also talk a bit more about little c, the creativity of individuals, which might not have this long-lasting effect of a Shakespearean sonnet, but is still really important to a social group at a particular point in time. And of course, there are many other definitions and many aspects from which and perspectives from which you can look at creativity. One important bit, and we're going to look at this, is of course, who is creative? Is it the speaker? Is it the hearer? What enables them to do this? What are the cognitive processes that allow us to be creative? As I will argue, it's the underlying constructional network together with constructional blending. Then when do we consider a product to be creative? Well, that's going to be the utterance level, the construct, but it needs to be evaluated by a speech community that they think it was innovative and of an appropriate quality. And of course, there are also interesting questions about where someone is creative, when they are creative, the specific situation, and pragmatic and sociolinguistic pieces of information play into this. From the start, however, I would like to point out, and towards the end, I'm going to come back to this, that of course, in psychological research, there is a huge focus on individual creativity, because it is clear that there are inter-individual differences with respect to intelligence, openness, extroversion, and so on. Now, in linguistics, be it from a generative perspective, because of the assumption of a universal grammar, or from a cognitive construction grammar perspective, where you assume that, well, all speakers have the same kind of cognitive setup, we're very often concerned about homogeneity, and of course, all languages are equally valid and equally good, but we know that individual speakers differ with respect to their linguistic abilities. Some are more fluent, some are brilliant writers, some people are really funny, whereas others are not. So there are, of course, clines of creativity. Even though we still believe in something like the abstract notion of a native speaker, even native speakers differ greatly. And that is something where creative research and creative construction grammar research needs to take a closer look.